Hi everyone, I'm Keith Mathis, or Dr. K. I'm making this video for several different purposes or several different audiences. First off, this particular video is being made first off for my grad students who are working on a critical path analysis question right now, and some are struggling a little bit for that. I'm also working on this video to go out to my LinkedIn group of over several thousand who are looking at possibility of taking a PMP test, which is going to have some of the critical path questions on this. I'm also working on this for those who are struggling with how to deal with critical path in the real world for their project schedules. So whoever's reading this is how the critical path is dealt with in PMBOK right now. So as I walk you through these slides, this is how the PMBOK deals with critical path and how you should be calculating it the correct way in critical path for the PMP test currently. Okay, so first off, let's look at what we're talking about when we're talking about critical path. Critical path is not what you think is important. Critical path is going to be classified as the longest path through the project. So when you're looking at all the different paths through the project from the beginning to the end, the critical path is going to be the longest path through the project. So a lot of times people are going to debate this with you and they'll say, no, it's the shortest path. It is not. The critical path is the longest path, and the reason for that is that if you look at the longest path and you lock that in, then that means all the subpaths or all the shortest paths will be completed within the duration of the longest path. The longest path will be the one you lock in because it will have zero float for the longest path, which means all the shorter paths will have float time. And so that means that if you lock the longest path in, all the others will have some flexibility. So you do not want the longest path continuing to expand, or it's going to expand your project. So that's why you want to find the longest path. That's the reason why when you have change orders, you want to always look and see what it does to your critical path, the longest path. It might impact your non-critical path, but if you've got float, it might not ever hurt your project based on the due date because it did not hurt your critical path. So as you look at this particular precedence diagram, you look at all the different paths from beginning to the end of the project, and so which is going to be your critical path. You're going to just add up the duration, and you'll notice that this bottom path is your critical path only because it's the longest path through the project. Okay, so you know that the critical path is what? It's the longest path through the project. All right, so let me show you a different one, and this comes up on the PMP test as well. This is called an activity on arrow. The one you just got through looking at was also called a precedence diagramming method. Both of these are network diagrams. These are the two types. But this is also a network diagram, but this is called an activity on arrow. This is not as popular, but you'll notice that the duration is on the arrow. The other one, the duration was in the box. Both of these are telling you the duration through the project, and all you do is find the longest on this one as well. Even though the duration is in the middle of the arrow, the longest duration is going to tell you the critical path same way. This one, a lot of times, for those of you who are doing this for the PMP, this will be on your test a lot of times for the PMP test for your project management professional certification, solely because it's not as popular and they're just trying to yank your chain a little bit. All right, so this feeds into a lot of times the precedence diagramming method, which gives you the 4 different standard ways of looking at a project. This is your finish to start relationship. All that means is look at your arrow. Your arrow is coming out of the back of activity A, which means A must finish before B can start. This is going to be a finish to finish. Look at your arrow. A must finish. Where's the arrow coming out of? Coming out of the back of A and going into the back of B. So it's a finish to finish. Then look at this. Where's the arrow coming out of? It's coming out of the front of A and going in the front of B. So this is a start to start. All you're doing is looking at the arrows. And then you look at this. This is coming out of the front of A, so that's a start, but it's going into the back of B. So this is a start to finish. So a finish to start is the most commonly used type of precedence relationship. A start to finish is rarely used, but the two activities can have two logical relationships really at the same time. For an example, a start to start or a finish to finish. And multiple relationships between the same activities are not recommended, but they sure can happen, and they can definitely happen for those of you who are taking your PMP. Now, an arrow diagramming method that you just saw a moment ago, where the duration is on the arrow, it's a method of constructing a project schedule network diagram that uses arrows to represent the activities and connects them at nodes to show the dependencies. Those of you who are taking this for my grad class, you'll notice in your textbook that your author uses this as an example there. You'll notice that the duration is not in a box, it's on the arrow, and you'll notice that the textbook uses a circle just to connect the different lines, and that's very common. This is also called activity on arrow, AOA. This is also called the arrow diagramming method, ADM. Now, for ADM or AOA, this only uses a finish to start relationship. So the activity on arrow relationship never uses a start to start or a finish to finish. It only uses a finish to start relationship. So on the test, for those of you who are taking the PMP test, if it ever talks about a start to start relationship, it's never going to be an activity on arrow relationship. All right, so let's assume something like this showed up on either your PMP test, or for you on the grad student side, showed up on even your test for a grad test. So let's look at this. This is a trick question. I'll tell you that up front, okay? So as you look at this, let's say we ask you which of these was a critical path. You know that the critical path is the longest path through the project. You'd start adding up all the durations. Well, first off, you know this is an arrow diagramming method because the duration is on the arrow. But this is a trick. So one piece of this trick, you'll notice these lines right here. Notice that they're more dashes. Okay, these are called dummy paths, okay? A dummy path is never counted. It only shows up on an arrow diagramming method. Now, what that dummy path means is that there's some connection between these two little activities, the activity D and H, or the activity B and C, or the activity F and H. If this was anything other than arrow diagramming method, that would be a true line. That would be a complete line. You would have to count it. But because it's a dotted line or a dash line, you never count it in arrow diagramming method. So what happens is you just close your eyes to it. Now what we did, or what I did, is I put a number in the middle of it to trick you, just like what has shown up on some of the PMP tests. For those of you who are taking it as a PMP test, we know that something similar to this has shown up on a PMP test. We're just trying to trick you like they did. But don't count it. It's never counted. So if you close your eyes and get rid of those three pieces, you notice that there's only three paths through that particular project. You've got the first path, which starts with A, D, G, and you've got the second path, which is C, E, H, and then you've got the third path, which is B, F, I. All right, a couple of things just to keep in mind. Mandatory dependencies, which can be legally or contractually required. And so those mandatory dependencies are sometimes called hard logic, means you didn't get to vote on them, you had to follow it a certain way. So that's going to be very important. You have that in your PMBOK. You also have some of that also in your textbook for those of you on the graduate side. You also have discretionary dependencies, which is sometimes called soft logic. Discretionary dependencies, regardless of whether you're doing it for the PMP or for the grad class, the discretionary dependencies is sometimes called soft logic or preferential logic. You're doing the project a certain way because you think it's better. Those of you who are doing this in the real world, this would be like you're doing your project a certain way because of best practices. Best practices is called soft logic or discretionary dependency, because you've learned that for your industry or your organization, it works better that particular way. Some will have external dependencies. Those of you who have done the construction projects and you have to get your permits, you have to have walkthroughs, not only with the customer, but with the bank or with all the inspectors. That's an external dependency that you would have. Leads and lags. Leads and lags are very common in many of your projects. A lead allows for an acceleration of a particular dependency. A lag directs a delay. You'll see that a lot of times in your scheduling. A lead, you'll see a minus and a duration. And so what happens is you're speeding a particular activity up. A lag, you'll see a plus and a duration. You won't see a lot of this. For those of you doing the PMP, you'll see some of this on your test. You might see a question or two on that. So you do have to count that in when you're looking at putting in your durations for each of your lineage. So for an example, on a lead, if you see a -5, you're subtracting from that whole line of duration of how long is it going to be from the start to the finish. And so it can make a difference on whether that's going to be your critical path. So if I see a -5, and let's say it's 25 days, and I see a -5, then I'm taking 5 days off of that. So that now makes it 20 days. If I see a lag and it's +10, and let's say it was 25 days, I'm now adding 10 days to that 25. And that might make a difference on whether it's going to be a critical path. So you do have to take a look at that when you're doing this. You'll also see the leads and lags, and it'll look something like this. So let's say, look at the first one, and so you'll see something like FS, that's a finish to start -2 weeks. And so that's a lead. And over here to the back side, you'll see an SS, that's a start to start plus 20 days. So when you see plus 20 days, that means that when you're adding these two together into that lineage, you're going to add 20 days. And that might make a difference on whether that's going to be your critical path. And so that might make a huge difference there. Now we're doing this manually, but your software, any software that you would be using in real life would actually might make that the critical path for you. So anyway, we're building a network diagram. It's a graphical display, and that's going to turn out to the chart that what you just got through looking at just a moment ago. You're getting ready to do that in just a moment. All right, so let's look at the critical path method. It's a network diagram, and so it gives you the flexibility of looking at the logical relationships and the paths within that schedule model. We're going to do what's called a forward pass and a backward pass. It is not a big deal. What it is, when we do the forward pass, we're looking at early start, early finish. We're going to start at the beginning of the project, and we're going to do the early start and early finish. And then when we get ready to do the backward pass, we're going to start at the end of the project and do the backward pass, and we're going to start at the late finish and late start of the project. And then what you're going to see is you're going to see how much float, and we're going to look at total float and free float associated with each activity. On your critical path, there will be no float. On your non-critical activities is where your float will be. The critical path is a sequence of activities that represents the longest path through the project, which determines the shortest possible duration. So if somebody wants to know the fastest you can do the project, it's a critical path. If somebody wants to know the shortest you can do the project, it's a critical path. The critical path is also called, the activities are called the critical activities. All right, so you've got two types of float. You have total float. It's the total amount of time we can delay the project without affecting the total end date of the project, the finish date. Free float is the amount of time I can delay an activity without hurting the very next activity. And then the critical path has zero total float. All right, so we're going to look at ES, which is early start, EF, which is early float. ES, which is early start, EF, which is early finish date. And you're going to see those acronyms. And then you're going to see LF, which is late finish date, LS, which is late start date. Those are going to be on your acronyms that are used. Those acronyms will also be used for those of you who do your PMP test. You'll also see that as well on your test. All right, so let's take this activity right here. So you'll notice that you've got arrows. All your arrows are going into the front and coming out of the back. And so those are all going to be finish to start relationships. You'll notice activity B has an arrow that's coming out of the back of B going into D. It's coming out of the back of B going into E, but you also notice one comes out of the back of C going into E. So let's talk about E, okay? So this arrow right here for E has to honor both C and B, the longest of the two. And so as we start doing this, so let's walk through this, okay? So the first thing you're going to do is add up the duration of all these different paths. So there's 3 paths here. So I'm going to add up the duration of the to determine the critical path. So as I add those up, ACEG, which is my top one, I've got 14 days. I'm going to add up the second one, which is BEG. You see that path, which is B going to E, going to G. It's going to be 15. And then I add up my third one, which is BDF, which is 23. So do you see the critical path? It's the longest of the three, which is going to be the bottom one. And so that's going to be BDF, which is 23. So I'm going to lock my critical path in on this one. And so that's going to be BDF. So I'll go ahead and start with it and lock it in. So I'll start on day 1. So here's how this works. Now, for those of you who have done 0 day, do not do a 0 day if you're doing a critical path. And here's why. Those of you who have been taught to do a 0 day, a lot of times you'll come up with the correct end date. But if you're doing it for the PMP does not ask you for just an end date. The PMP will ask you for dates along the sequence. You will be a day off all the way through. And the reason is because you want to do it based on calendar days. And the calendar day does not have a 0 day. And so they'll ask you what is the finish date or what is the start date for D, or what is the finish date for E. And so you'll be a day off all the way through with that. So what is the start date for B? It's going to be day 1, not a 0 day, because your calendar does not have a 0 day. So here's how the best way to do this. So B starts on day 1. So let's assume this is May. So it starts on May 1. Starts on May 1, it's 6 days duration. So starts on May 1, it's 6 days of duration. So day 1 and 6 days of duration. 1 and 6 is 7. Minus 1 is 6. So if it's 6 days duration and it starts on May 1st, 6 days duration plus day 1 means it will finish at the end of day 6. So if you think of the morning and the afternoon as a full days of work, starts on the 1st, finishes at the end of day 6. So that will make more sense as you look at this with calendar days. So if it finishes at the end of day 6, May 6 of activity B, then D is going to start on the morning. What's your next day of work day for this is going to start on day 7, May 7. And so I'm going to go to May 7. Since it's morning and afternoon is a full work day, 7 and 10 is 17, which means it's going to finish at the end of day 16. F is going to start on the morning of day 17. 17 and 7 is 24 minus 1, which means it'll finish at the end of day 23. You'll remember that the duration there was 23 days because you've subtracted it. It finished at the end of the day 23. And then I can go up and I can take a look at E. Because E has to honor B and C, I can start E on day 7. But remember, if C finishes later than day 7, I have to go back and honor that. And so if you'll look at B finished at the end of day 6 over here, which means the next open day for E to start is going to be May 7th. 7 and 3 is 10, minus 1 is 9. I can start on the morning of May 10th. 10 and 6 is 16, minus 1 is going to be 15. So I'm okay so far. A is coming off of day 1 over here, off of start, so I can start on day 1 here. 1 and 2 is 3, minus 1 is 2. C can start on May 3rd. 3 and 3 is 6, minus 1 is 5. And so 5, I've got a free day from C. I could start on morning of the 6th, but I can't do that because E can't start until the morning of the 7th because of B's activity. So I've got a free day here of day 6. So as you look at all of this, this is called an early start so far. So as you look here at this is your start, your early starts. You've got all of those in at this point. So you haven't done your backward pass. All you've done is your forward pass. So you've got all of those plugged in right now. Now you're getting ready to do your backward pass. Now, if you'll look down here at F, F is day 23. You're going to now drop your numbers down into your critical path. Your critical path has 0 float, so your forward pass and your backward pass are identical for your critical path. You're also going to move your longest date up here to your non-critical longest, your late finish date for your non-critical path, which is G of 23, because from F was your critical path longest date of 23. So 23 will go up here to G. Now you're going to start working backwards. So 23 was your longest date. So now what you did going forward, you're going to do going backwards. So now you're going to go 23 minus 6 plus 1. Now you'll see the formula we gave you up here at the top. Late finish minus the duration plus 1. So you're going to go 23 minus 6 plus 1, which will bring it down to 18. Then you'll turn around and drop down to 17. 17 minus 3 plus 1, which will be May 15th. Then you'll drop it down again to 14. 14 minus 3 plus 1. You'll drop it down again. 11 minus 2 plus 1. Okay, so what you'll notice here as you're going backwards, you'll notice there's a gap between G. You've got G can start on the morning of May 10th. It can finish on May 18th. That's going to be called float, and we'll show you how to do that in just a moment. But you'll notice on F, it's got to start on the 17th. It has no float. That's because the bottom row here is your critical path. So when we're talking about critical path, BDF has to start and stop on those dates. ACEG can start and stop. So I can start on the 10th. I have to start G on the 18th. And so what that really means is that I can start my team on the 10th, but if we were having trouble, I could move them down and work them on this bottom row until the 17th or 18th. As long as I've got my team back up here by the 18th, I have not hurt my team at all. Okay, so the next piece we will do, we're going to do some more of these, so don't worry about it. My next piece, I'm going to then turn around and we're going to now figure out the total float. Total float is easier than free float, I think. So now we're going to turn around and figure out total float. Total float is nothing more than a calculation. It's late finish minus early finish. Total float is not total float for the entire project. It's total float for nothing more than just the activity. So it's late finish minus the early finish. So I do total float just for G. Then I do total float just for E, I do total float just for C, and I do total float just for A. You'll notice there's no total float for B, D, or F. You know why? It's the critical path. So there's no total float for there. You do not add up all of the A, C, E, and G. If you do, you'll have more total float than you have project time. So don't add those up. They're going to ask you, how much total float does C have? How much total float does G have? They're always going to ask it. For those of you who are doing this for the PMP, they're going to ask it per activity is what they're going to ask you. Okay, so that's total float. How much time we can delay the activity before it hurts the project end date. Now let's look at free float. Free float is how much time I can delay the activity before it hurts the very next activity. All right, so let's calculate the free float. So now what you're doing is you're going from one activity to the other. So what you're looking at here, this finishes on May 2nd. This starts on the morning of May 3rd. Now, if you subtract May 5th from May 7th, it's going to give you 2 days. But do you really have 2 days there? So take a look at it. You don't. You do not have 2 days because you're working all day May 5th. You're working all day May 7th. How many days do you really have open? You have May 6th. So you really only have 1 day of work there, and that's going to be May 6th. So to pull it all together, you've got 1 day of free float for C. Notice that's the 6th. You've got 8 days of free float to G. And so as you look at the graphic here, this is going to show you everything for your total float as well as your free float. Now let's get ready to go and look at some of the others. You've got several to calculate on your own. All right, before we do this, this is another type of thing. For those of you who do the PMP, This is a word problem that they will give you for the PMP. For those of you who are doing the grad program, just kind of read this through and I'll actually show you the graphic for this and walk you through this. So for those of you who do the PMP, you'll actually, the next graphic will show you this word problem. But what will happen on the PMP test is they'll show you this graphic and you will have to graph this out to figure this out. So let me read it to you and then I'll show you the graph, okay? The XYZ project has 3 paths through the project. Path 1 will begin at start with activity A with a duration of 1 day, followed by a finish to start relationship of C with a duration of 2 days, followed by a finish to start relationship of E with a duration of 10 days, followed by a finish to start relationship of G with a duration of 8 days. Path 2 will begin at start with activity B with a duration of 5 days, followed by a finish to start relationship of D with a duration of 6 days, followed by a finish to start relationship of F with a duration of 6 days. Path 3 will begin at start with activity B with a duration of 5 days, followed by a finish to start relationship of E with a duration of 10 days, followed by a finish to start relationship of G with a duration of 8 days. All right, so let me show you how this is going to look in a graphic. Okay, so here's your activity 2 graphic. So what do? First thing you want to do is find your critical path. So when you find your critical path, you just add up your paths. So what's your critical path? It's going to be BEG. All right, so start with your critical path, anchor your critical path. Start on day 1. 1 and 5 is 6, minus 1 is 5. E starts on day 6. 6 and 10 is 16, minus 1 is 15. G starts on day 16. 16 and 8 is 23. Now remember, you can stop this video anytime you want to catch up, okay? And then go ahead and finish your forward passes on everything. So finishing your forward passes on everything so that you don't get lost. Don't try to do a backward pass until you do all your forward passes. So go ahead and do all those. Make sure all your numbers are correct. So if you haven't done those, just go ahead and stop. Make sure you got all your forward passes done. And then do your backward pass. Take your 23 from G and bring it down here in the back of F and start backwards. So now you're doing the opposite. Late finish minus the duration plus 1. So it's 23 minus 6 plus 1. Then drop it down from 18 to 17 because you're going backwards. 17 minus 6 plus 1. And then you remember C is coming off of the E, so it's 6. Go drop down to 5. 5 minus 2 plus 1. Drop it down to 3. 3 minus 1 plus 1. Okay, if your numbers lined up there, now go ahead and drop it down. Now you're getting ready to look for your total floats. That usually helps you. Do your totals first. That should give you 6. That should give you another 6. Look at C, should give you 2. A should give you 2. Those are totals. How much time you can delay the project before it hurts the project end date. Then go ahead and look at free floats. That should give you 2 days, May 4th and May 5th. And then F is kind of a trick question because day 18 through the end of day 23. Remember, your last day on your project is a full work day. So that's 6 days of free float is what that's called. So that's what activity 2 should look like. Okay, you can stop the video and double check your answers. All right, this is activity 3. Let me kind of run through this real quick and show you. This is actually going to have a lag. That's what the FS plus 4 is. So that had to be taken into account. That made a difference. That made it into your actual, that made it into your critical path, remember? So let's walk you through it very quickly here because I know you got a lot of things to do. So that turned it into it. So that turned it into 1 and 5, turned into 5, 6, 3, 8. All right, so the best way to handle that is cover it up. And so what would F be if there was no lag there, or no, yeah, that's right. That was a lag. So if D ended on day 8, May 8th, F would start on May 9th, and so then just add the raw numbers in. It was 4 days, so I would normally put a 9 at the top and then add those 4 days in. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and that's what it would be. So put your 13 in there. And then go ahead just like normal. 14, 15, 16, 17. And that's what it would be. Minus 1, which would make it 16. And then drop those numbers in the bottom because this is your critical path, and then move on. And then the rest of it is just like you've been doing all the way through. So go with those numbers all the way through. And then when you do your backward pass, you don't have a backward pass there on the bottom one because it's critical path, so the forward and the backward pass were identical. So you move your 16 up here to the late finish of the non-critical path. And then you do 16 minus 3 plus 1 was 14. And then you move it down to 13, coming back. 13 minus 5 plus 1, 9. Drop it down again. 8 minus 2 plus 1, 7. 6 minus 4 plus 1, 3. You can stop the video at any time, remember. And then do your total floats first. That seems to go better. So you'll have 2 total on G, 2 total on E, 2 total on C, 2 total on A. All right. And then you remember on free float, you'll have 2 on G. And that's what activity 3 should look like. And then this will be a little test for you guys who are doing the PMP. They'll throw you off sometimes. Jeffrey sees an FS minus 6 days on a test. How should he interpret it? This is a finish to start lead of 6 days, lag of 6 days. This is an FS, which means the project will finish sooner than 6 days. This is an FS, which means to add 6 days to the final completion day. What does that really mean? Well, the right answer, this is a lead of 6 days. Remember, an FS is a finish to start minus 6, which means you're cutting 6 days out of that lineage. So this is a lead because you're cutting 6 days out of that lineage. Okay. All right, so schedule compression. Remember, you got crashing and fast tracking. They're not the same. Crashing a project, you're throwing more resources at it. Fast tracking, you're lining stuff up and running more things simultaneously. And so if you're crashing, the negative of crashing is almost always that it's going to cost us more money. The negative of fast tracking is almost always that we're going to have risk, is almost always going to be the problem with that. Risk and quality is the problem with fast tracking. So crashing, it shortens the schedule duration for the least cost by adding resources, but it may increase risk and cost. So the negative for crashing is almost always going to be a cost issue. Fast tracking, activities or phases done in parallel is almost always going to be a rework or a risk issue for fast tracking because you're running so many things in parallel. When there's a problem, it takes longer to figure out what's gone wrong. And then just to make sure you've seen this and look at this, this is a milestone bar. A lot of times people will play tricks with you about a milestone bar. This is mainly for you guys folks who are doing the PMP. They'll ask you how much duration does a milestone bar have? It's a trick question. Milestone bars really don't have durations. Activities have durations. A milestone bar shows you at the beginning and the ending of a milestone. It really makes no difference in the real world. I know what you're talking about when you say, well, this milestone is 47 days. The activities add up to 47 days for that milestone, but for doing the PMP test, the milestone has 0 duration. The activities do, but just for semantics for the test, make sure you know something like that. And then this is actually a milestone chart, and this is something that would be used for a PMO, or this is something that would be used when you're talking to management. They're looking at a much higher level. Many people have not seen a milestone chart or something used at this level. And then for those of you who are not familiar with it, a burn up or burn down chart. This is used a lot of times in the agile world, and so I threw this in just to make sure you've seen one. A burn up or burn down chart is really showing the same things. It's showing story points or features depending on what you're tracking here, but it's really showing the same thing. A burn down or a burn up chart. So a burn down chart, let's go with that. And so we've got both here. So a burn down chart is going to be this one here. So it starts at 200. So let's say we've got 200 features, or the story points is what we have here. So we've got 200 story points, and every time we have a meeting with you, and let's say you're our manager or the PMO director, we're showing you how many story points we have left. That's really what it is. And so we started at 200 is how many we have. to deliver to you. And so we're showing a burn down chart of how many we have left. On the flip side, this other one, the blue one, is a burn up of how many story points or user stories we have to deliver. So we have 200 to deliver, and so every time we meet with you, we're showing you how many we've delivered. That's the only difference really of these two. And so both are very, very common in the Agile world because we're handing both of those to you. So one's a burn down chart, showing you how many we're supposed to deliver and how many we have left. One's showing you how many we have to deliver and how many we've delivered so far. And so it's really not that big of a deal on either case. And this is another view of a burn down chart. And in this case, we've started with 200 and we're showing you how many we have left all the way down to this. So I hope this helps you a little bit, whether you're looking at it through the eyes of a PMP test. I hope it helps you and kind of clarifies it a little bit for you. I know it might be different than the real world, but it doesn't matter. Just drink the Kool-Aid. Make sure you answer the questions right for your PMP test. For you folks who are in my grad class, just make sure that hopefully that opened your eyes a little bit to what we're talking about for a critical path. Either way, I hope it helped you. God bless you. Have a great day. Bye now.